Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 371, City Building Games.
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. Hopefully, you have made the jump and bought Game Toppers. If you haven't yet, this is the time to do it. The brand new Kickstarter, it is fantastic, good quality. Being able to get the legs just to make them their own table, that makes it even better. There's so many things to love about Game Toppers. You just need to go check them out if you haven't done it yet. That is GameToppersLLC.com.
Welcome to Meeple Nation. We are your hosts. I'm Andy Holliday.
I'm Nathan Howard.
I'm Dave Holliday.
I'm Logan Howard.
This week we are discussing games that have city building as an element. And by city building, not necessarily just cities. It's civilization building, it's empire building, building, all those elements wrapped into that.
It's interesting. So many mechanics that I really, really love. But when I think about building games, whether it's city, building, whatever, Puerto Rico right here is at the top of the list, right? The thing that I do more than anything in games like this is I want to build buildings. And I love building stuff. As I've looked at these games, that's totally a huge part of my fascination.
Are you sure?
I'm not.
You know, Dave, looking at our list of city building games, I noticed that one of your top 5 is on this list, Charterstone.
Yes.
Dave is going to somehow try to get Charterstone involved in every game mechanic that we talk about, even if it's not related.
I can figure out a way.
But one of his least favorite games is also included on this list, which is Seven Wonders. It's not always necessarily that you like to build, because some games...
Well, in Seven Wonders, you don't actually build.
So that's my complaint about some of the other games on there. But, I mean, like, it still has the loosely connected, like, Welcome To. I love one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fantastic game. You know,
You're building a neighborhood!
The neighborhood's already built, you're just putting numbers on it. It's like you're just going out there and slapping addresses on there.
When you slap an address on there, the building's complete. Until then, it's just a lot.
I like Welcome To. It's just, there's not much to build upon. To me, city building is more almost... It's the one that Nathan always thinks he needs one more
Engine
turn.
building?
Engine building, yes, same. I'm with you.
That's what I come to with city building in my head. Welcome To, like you're saying, that you can make an argument, you're building your neighborhood and everything right. Empty lots, sure, whatever. It doesn't really have that element, so it doesn't really connect it to much building in my head. But you are assembling.
Well, we all don't live in your head, Logan.
It's a
We
good
all
thing.
don't live in mine either.
Good.
Similar, look at Machikoro, where, I mean, you are building those buildings are available.
And Machikoro is just so amazing.
Machikoro is a great game. Which reminds me, we still need to finish our Machikoro legacy.
Yes, sir.
You're rolling, you're producing those buildings, you're establishing those buildings within your community, your city, and your city is going to be different than my city, just like Welcome To. Your neighborhood's going to be different than my neighborhood. Yeah, we have the plots that are there, the numbering system that we're going to use. So you can look at it a little bit both ways. But city building games are fun. One that I like to play, David whoops my butt at this one too, is Rolling Through the Ages, Bronze Age, which is a simple city building game. It's a dice game where you're rolling dice and you roll dice equal to the amount of cities that you have built. You're trying to build monuments, so you need to establish workers, and you need to feed those workers, gain goods and resources so that you're able to trade those in for money, to buy the upgrades so that you can avoid droughts, pestilence, famines. Simple little game. And I have the physical copy somewhere, but I can't find my physical copy. Dave, did you borrow my physical copy?
I've only ever played this online. I love it. It's a great game, and it's quick, it's simple, and I beat you at it most of the time. So
You do,
what's
yes.
not to love?
Yeah. There's a lot of games, especially the ones we play online. I've just decided that I can count a loss just as easy as I can count a win. So.
One of the games that falls under this city building that I own, that I've owned for quite some time, is Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. Now, any of you guys played that game?
It reminds me of Pillars of the Earth, where it has a very similar look to it, but I like how this game uses the box part of it. So
Yeah,
carry on.
You do. You use the bottom of the box. You're building a monument, so the bottom of the box is part of the monument. You're building columns. You're building the door frames for Cleopatra's monument, throne and pedestals, sphinxes, and obelisks. And you are also building the mosaics that go on top of the palace's garden. It's kind of a cool game. You're gaining cards, you're spending resources to build these different parts of the monument, and depending on what you build, you're going to gain talents, which is essentially money or gold. You're going to gain talents based on whatever it is you build. There's cards that you're going to be taking. When you take cards, you're going to take all the cards in a column. Now, some of those cards might be face down, some might be face up. You shuffle the deck together, you actually flip the deck, so you're shuffling half the deck face down and half the deck face up.
So they're two-sided cards?
No. So you'll see just the card back on face down ones. You don't know what you're getting, and the face up ones you can see. Yeah. That can benefit you or hurt you because there's some cards will actually give you corruption. Whenever you play cards that have corruption on them, they'll always have a better benefit, give you more resources or whatever. But you'll gain corruption. You're going to put corruption in these little pyramids that each player has. At the end of the game, whoever has the most corruption gets sacrificed to Cleopatra's crocodile. And so they're out of the game, and then after that, it's whoever has the most money wins. So you want to balance how much corruption you're getting with trying to pay attention to what the other players are gaining, but still have the most money. So it's kind of like a bear chase, right? As long as you're not the most corrupt person, then if you have the most money, you win. Once that person that has the most corruptions out of the game, you can have the most corruption after that and still win the game. Really interesting and fun. It's been a long time since I played this game. I need to get it back to the table. I remember it being a lot of fun.
Sestinkin Gloomhaven.
It's beyond that. It's been a lot longer than a year or two since I've had that to the table. It's been at least a decade.
You know, another one of yours that we need to get to the table also fits in this category. Sid Meier's Civilization.
Yes, it has been a long time since we've played that game.
I can't recall a game that I was more excited about than that game. It seems like, is that the same one that was just in?
It is very long.
Yeah.
Sounds like your kind of game, Dave.
I don't even know if we've ever finished a game of it.
I have.
Have you?
But I don't think the one we played we actually finished.
Yeah, I think Richie has the same game, or Dennis had it, or somebody. Man, we started it several times, but it was always when we knew we didn't have time to finish it right away, and we're like, we'll get back to it, and then we never did. It's based on the computer game Civilization, which I still love that game. And all the new versions of it, I just love it.
Which is also a very long game.
Yeah, I was super excited for this one to come out. We need to play that some more.
I do have one of the expansions for it. I know there's at least one other expansion that I don't own. But since I never get it to the table, I didn't bother buying it. And speaking of games I don't get to the table very often, as I was looking at this game mechanic and looking through the list, I had to dust off a few games that were on my shelf. One that I haven't played in a long time as well. Such a cool game, and it's Princes of Florence.
So I used to have this game a long time ago. It was one that I culled it. Now I always have culling regrets. Still, we weren't playing the game. I really enjoyed this game.
Everyone has their own principality. You're trying to get works of art created. So you're bringing in artists, and you're going to score different points. So each have profession cards, and that profession card is a professional that's going to come to your principality and create a work of art. Each card is going to have certain things on there that are going to give you bonus points. For example, maybe one of the artists prefers that you have a lake in your principality, and you're going to get bonus points if you have a lake. There's 3 different freedom tiles that you have. There's freedom of speech, freedom of travel, and freedom of opinion. Each professional is going to prefer one of those freedoms, and you'll gain bonus points if you have these certain things in your principality already when you have that work of art created. The catch is, there's only 7 rounds in the game. As the rounds progress, in order to actually create that work, you have to meet a threshold of points. So in the first round, if you create a work of art, it only has to be worth 7 points to create it in the game. Round 2, it now has to be worth 10 points. Go to round 7, it has to be worth 17 points, or you can't even create the work. There's forests, there's lakes, there's parks, there's several different types of buildings that you can build. It is just a very solid game. Once again, one that I think we probably ought to try out one night at game night.
I would love to come back to revisit the game. Like I said, it's been years. When did the game come out?
It came out in 2000. It's an oldie.
I probably bought the game when it first came out. It's probably been a minimum 10 years since I played it last.
Oh, it's been at least that long since I played it too. So yeah, definitely one I'd like to get to the table once again. Not super heavy, probably a midweight game.
The classic Euro game.
Nathan, you've been talking a lot about Gloomhaven. What about Founders of Gloomhaven?
I was kind of hoping you wouldn't bring up Founders of Gloomhaven. It's on my call list.
Is it really?
Yeah, so Founders of Gloomhaven is a lot different than Gloomhaven.
Well, yeah, because you're just building the city.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily...
Everybody bought Founders of Gloomhaven just because it had the Gloomhaven name. It's based in the region where Gloomhaven is forged. If you're looking at the timeline of Gloomhaven, this happens prior to Gloomhaven game. Players are gathering resources and trying to place buildings on the map, which eventually become the city of Gloomhaven, to try to earn prestige. The interesting thing about it is you actually need to rely on other players building buildings as well. It wasn't my favorite city building game by any means. It is on my calling list. I played it solo, so maybe that would have a small factor. But my one and only play of it was not a shining moment in my game history. So
last week with Catan, it's not necessarily that it's a bad game, but it just doesn't. But we got so many games vying for our attention that it needs to be a pretty fantastic game to take it over.
That probably has more to do with it than anything.
I look at the shelf all the time, and I'm just like, wow, that's a great game. Wow, that's a great game. Wow, I wish we could play that more. It's just that amount of time. It's so finite.
Yeah, that's true.
Another oldie but goodie that I would love to revisit is one that we used to play all the time at game night, and I loved it. It's one of my favorites during that time. Kalis came out in 2005. I just thought it was a really, really fun game. It's a worker placement game. You place your workers, and then your workers activate and take their actions in order along this pathway where you place them. I just always really, really enjoyed this game. It's one I think would be really fun to play again.
I think we stopped playing that at our game night because I think Richie ended up in a fight with someone.
I could see that happening because the game, it lasts a long time. Playtime of 60 to 150 minutes. And playing that with Dave is definitely
amazing.
It is amazing, yes, but it's a game that really drug on for me. That was a game where I had a lot of downtime between my turns. I've blocked a lot of that memories out of my mind for some reason. I remember playing the game several times. Definitely not within my library anymore.
Isn't that the balance between city builders, the time limit, putting enough effort into building, doing the engine building without going overboard? And that's what really makes it. The balance, if they find that, it makes it a really good game. One game that I'm actually surprised I haven't played is Architects of the West Kingdom. I need to play the other two games of the West Kingdom series, and they're fantastic. Watched a video about it today. So want to. It's on my list of games I want to play.
This is one of my favorite worker placement games.
There were so many concepts in there. That's fantastic. The black market, and then your meeples go to jail. How fantastic is that?
Not only that, there's an action space that can arrest other people's meeples that are on the board. The way it works is if you take an action, your meeple stays on the board. Let's say I want to get stone. I put a meeple on there, I get a stone. Next round, let's say I want to get stone again. I put a meeple on there, now I have 2 meeples, so now I get 2 stone. And they stay there. If I want to go there again, I'll get 3 stone, because I have 3 meeples on it. Well, once I have 3 meeples on there, now it's starting to get tempting for the other players to go in and arrest my people. When they arrest your people, your meeples go to their player board. On a later action, they can go and put your meeples in prison, and they get 1 coin for each meeple that is put in prison. If someone's done that multiple times, they can put another meeple where they get to gather up meeples. They can gather up their own, which go back to their board, and they can gather up other players. And they gather up all the meeples in one location of one color.
You'll notice, Logan, Nathan, not you who are listening, but Andy has a really big smile on his face when he talks about this.
Because he's imagining doing it to you?
Because, yeah. You don't actually have to have 3 people on the board for it to be tempting. If you're me, Andy Poops will do it if you have just 2 people on the board.
Well, I usually will do that if someone else has like 3 or 4, and by that time I probably have taken that action multiple times, so it's, okay, I'm going to take mine, I'll take Richie's because he has 3, okay, well there's only 2s left, I'll take Dave's because there's 2.
Because it's Dave.
I can support that.
The mechanics of all of it, where your meeples stay out there, and you don't get them back, so you have to manage those. At some point, you have to take the action to take your meeples back, or go to the prison and get them out. Once again, if the black market empties, then you look over at the jail, and it actually, whoever has the most meeples in jail, you get penalized for that. You get debt card, which are worth negative points at the end of the game. A lot of fun. I think we definitely need to introduce you to Architects of the West Kingdom, and I'm super excited for the expansions that are coming out too.
I just think we need to do a West Kingdom night and just hit them one after the other, because they got the...
we could do Tome Saga, right?
Yeah, the Tome Saga, where it kind of turns it into...
kind of a campaign-esque game, right?
Campaign-esque. That'll intrigue Nathan even more. Get him to be on board.
The first of the 3 of the West Kingdom games was Architects. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
The other games, which I think some of them still have some city building.
Paladins of the West Kingdom, Yeah, a little bit. Viscounts, not so much. You're kind of more going around the town. There's not a lot of city building, but 3 solid games. I mean, yeah they've done a great job with those.
When this mechanic was coming up, one game that I really wanted to get to the table, we couldn't because of Gloomhaven, was Cyclades, a game that I inherited from a neighbor. 2 to 5 player game. Players are working to try to gain favor of the gods. They're trying to gain favors of the different gods. In the base game, there's Ares, Poseidon, Zeus, Athena, and Apollo. If you gain the favor of Ares, he will allow you to move your armies and build fortresses, which will allow you to fortify your cities. Poseidon will do the same thing, except for with your navy, allow you to build ships and ports. Zeus allows you to hire priests, which will allow you to get cards cheaper. Athena provides philosophers, and then each of those 4 also provide a building. I talked about the fortresses, the ports. Zeus helps you build temples. Athena helps you build universities. Once you have one of each of these 4 buildings on the board, you must upgrade that to a metropolis, which one of the ways to win the game is you have 2 metropolises. However, once you have a metropolis, it allows you to become a target. Other players can try to come over and take over that island, and then they claim that metropolis from themselves. You can gain the favor of Apollo, which Apollo is always on the board. The other gods, however, may not be on the board. Depending on the number of players, you're going to use 1 less than the player count. As bidding goes back and forth, so if I'm planning to get Ares, then somebody can come and outbid me. Once I'm outbid, then I have to go somewhere. I can't go right back to Ares. I have to go to Poseidon or Zeus. And then if I get kicked out of there, then I can go back to Ares. That whole auction where you're trying to bid on which god's favor you're going to get. But then if you don't gain any of those favors, or you can't afford to go, then every player can go gain the favor of Apollo. It has a time of 60 to 90 minutes. It looks like it sticks pretty close to that. I'm really excited. There's several expansions for us that I also inherited. So I'm looking forward to playing that. Increases the player size to 6.
Let's do it.
We got to just put Gloomhaven on the back burner for a little bit.
There's several games on this list that I just have to mention. There's several favorites. Dalton, my oldest son, his favorite game is Above and Below. It's the only game that I can actually get him to play. He likes it so much that if it's a possibility that that game might be played, he's like gung-ho, ready to go. Let's get it. Let's play. He wants to introduce everybody to it. Really, really big on that game. If only I could get him to play others, he would realize how many good games there are.
That's the truth with a lot of non-gamers. You got to introduce them to the right game.
I mentioned Puerto Rico. That's Adrian's favorite game. That's been her favorite game for quite a while.
San Juan, the card game version of Puerto Rico. I really like that one.
Nathan Tenney up in Washington, his favorite game is this ilk as well. Suburbia. Yeah.
Suburbia is a
good
fun game.
I love it too. It's great. Except not playing it with Nathan Tenney because he's too good.
A lighter city building game. It's called Harbor. It's a card game. The designer is Scott Alms, and one of the artists is actually our cousin Max Holiday. The other artist is Rob Lundy. It was published by a local game company, Tasty Minstrel Games. Each player has their own player board. One side of the player board has just a generic, everybody's the same, and then the flip side, you have unique abilities. You're gaining resources. The gist of the game is you're trying to gain enough resources to sell them at the market to buy buildings. Buildings are worth victory points. Worker placement. Each player has a starting building on their player mat. You can also play your workers on buildings that are for sale. Buildings are in the middle of the board and anybody can buy them. They're still available for you to place your workers on. When you buy a building, it goes over in front of you. You can even play your workers on other players' buildings. But when you do, you have to give that player a resource. A lot more to it. City building aspect of it. There's ways to get certain buildings that make it so you don't have to pay to play on other players' buildings. Market has a unique mechanic to it. When you sell goods, there's a track and there's a threshold you have to meet to be able to sell your goods. For example, let's say you have livestock on the market. There's 4 spots on the market, so you can sell fish, wood, stone, and livestock. Let's say the livestock is on the rightmost space, which you have to have at least 5 livestock to sell at the market at that point. But you also, when you sell your livestock, you gain 5 coins towards purchasing a building. So the only time you would ever sell any of your resources is when you are purchasing a building. There's no coins, you don't save anything, you don't get change. You just sell and enough to get a building, and if you overpay, you overpay. The interesting thing is, you can have warehouses, buildings that have a warehouse icon. which means you pay fewer resources for purchasing buildings. 6 coins to purchase a building. Maybe my livestock is worth 5 coins out of that, and my wood, I can get 2 coins out of that. I have to sell everything, however many warehouses I have. Let's say I have 3 warehouses, I can save up to 3 of those resources, so I don't have to try to accrue those again. And the interesting thing about the market is once you sell the livestock, for example, if it's at the highest level, it will drop down and slide all the way over and start over in first slot. So it's actually worth less money at that point. Everything else shifts to the right. So anything that gets sold on your turn will shift down, scoot over, and follow around. So very interesting mechanic on the market. The buildings are all unique. They all do different things. It's kind of a fun game. I love the fact it reminds me of the Tiny Epic games where a lot of content in such a small box.
It's funny you mention that because the designer of the Tiny Epic games is Scott Ohms.
Oh, that's a good point. Makes sense. Great game. I haven't owned it that long. I've only played it once, but I had a lot of fun playing it.
I own it and haven't played it yet. I'm looking forward to giving it a try. We can't go without talking about one of my favorite games, Attica.
I was waiting for you to mention it.
I love Attica. Players are trying to connect 2 shrines, and if they're unable to connect the shrines, then they have to establish all their buildings from their city onto the player board. It's on my top shelf. Very, very much enjoy this game. Players are trying to use resources that are on the board as well as claiming resource cards from the resource pile, using those to satisfy the requirements to build the buildings onto the board. Like I said, the goal is to try to connect 2 of the shrines. However, players are going to start to block positions. The board is full of hexes, and if a building is in that hex, that path gets blocked. Each player is going to have 5 stacks of buildings, and as soon as they deplete one of those stacks of buildings, then they can add a new tile to the board, which will extend the game board, providing new resources, possibly an additional path to reach that other shrine. The game has been re-implemented, available as US Telegraph. Follows all the same principles, same building requirements, just a little bit different feel. Attica has a special place in my heart. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Attica during our city building episode.
I can't believe I haven't played that game.
You haven't played that game?
I have not played that game.
We should brush it off. It's been so long that it'd be a brand new game for me.
You can play it online. Dave and I have played it several times last year.
But we're not cool, so we need to play games in person.
Well, it's your fault. I don't keep you off the internet.
I think this falls into the category. It's my favorite aspect of this game. Tapestry. You're building all the buildings off of your board and putting them into your city to score your points and building the extra buildings as you're moving up on the tracks on the main board.
Surprised it didn't come up including the city building mechanic. Same thing with Jump Drive, where Jump Drive is very similar to the city, which we'll talk more about next week. Very similar mechanics. For some reason, Jump Drive doesn't. That. Whereas a game like Space Dealer, which is in space, developing a civilization, does include that city building. A Space Dealer can include that. Jump Drive, most definitely. If you're going to include Jump Drive, you could go down that rabbit hole and include any of those Race for the Galaxy.
A game that has been re-released, I have not played the second edition, so I don't know how different it is to the original, is Kingsburg. This has been a family favorite. If there's a default game, it's, oh, let's play Kingsburg. Oh, okay, yeah, let's play Kingsburg. No one is ever not in the mood to play this game. Mm-hmm. You have different members of the King's Court that you're going to influence. Everyone has 3 dice that you're rolling. Those die faces, you add them up to influence the higher level people in the King's Court all the way up to the king. Or you save your 1 to the very end, which would be the court jester, the last person in the King's Court. You're doing this to gain resources or victory points to build your city. And once again, I don't know how the second edition is, but I would recommend playing with the expansion because you have a bigger city map you can build on. There's so many strategies that you can go with in Kingsburg. You can go the Dave strategy, which is more dice and as many dice as you can get.
Mm-hmm. Which I usually love, but the last time we played, it did not. One of the things that happens at the end of every year, there's an attack. One of the things that you're doing as you're influencing different people is you can influence and gain soldiers, defense, protect your board. Each year, there are several different cards that could be there. You flip over a card and it tells you what the attack is. Some of those cards can destroy buildings. And my strategy is generally, I'm not going to focus on defense. I'm going to have fun doing all this other stuff instead, because it's only 1 in 5 that I'm going to lose a building. Well, last time we played, there were 4. I think every year they destroyed a building. My engine never was able to get off the ground, taken out from under me every time.
It's So you play through the whole year, the 4 seasons, and then in winter is when the attack comes. You can get up to 3 buildings built that year, unless you have the envoy, which lets you build a 4th building. Like Dave said, there's different strategies you can go for. You can go for more of a defensive strategy with buildings, or you can just go with a defensive strategy by influencing the general, which gives you soldiers. Those soldiers are only temporary, are only good for that year, whereas the buildings will be there for the rest of the game. Very interesting game. We've always enjoyed playing this game. It's Kingsburg. I know that they have the new version out, so check that one out.
It was another game that I owned and culled. One that we played that you guys all seriously loved. Potemkin Empire.
That was good.
I actually really enjoyed it. Logan hated it.
I didn't hate it. There's games that I have hated. It was a dislike for sure.
You're playing as mayors in a small Russian village, and you're attempting to impress the Empress by convincing her that you have the most prestigious and prosperous and stable village in the land. With her quick visit, and so what you're going to do is you're essentially making facades. These buildings aren't real. Players are putting out cards and saying, okay, this is this building, to try to get that influence to be able to win. And other players have to try to figure out which buildings you're faking and which buildings are real. There was a lot of back and forth, which I found very entertaining. It's only a 45-minute game. Our gameplay was pretty close to that time. I found the game highly entertaining. And I can see why Logan didn't like it. He might not have hated it, but I can definitely see why he would not be on somebody's favorite list. What I really did like about this is that each building card that's folds in half. So you can put the card from the deck that represents the building, you put it face down behind this facade. If you can't tell, I'm giving you all these visuals here. Those on radio can follow right along. I think that's a great little touch, including the element that these buildings may or may not be legitimate buildings. It's just a front.
I would be curious to see the longevity of the components, because you're folding the card.
Well, you only really fold them once.
I guess that's true.
You're straightening it to put it in the box and then propping it up when you pull it out of the box. Very valid point, though, that longevity of the game could be shorter.
If it's a game you play a lot, which we don't typically have a lot of those.
I'm not going to mention Gloomhaven.
That we play a lot. There's a few. Honestly, of all of our games, if a game gets played 5 times, we've played it a lot.
You're absolutely right.
Which we're going to play Lockdown Nemesis so much.
You put it on the table and set it up.
Well, we have to, so that way I can justify how much I spent on it.
We can play it at SaltCon, too. It's a fun, simple little game. Easy to teach. And has that short time. I was highly entertained.
It was fun.
I would enjoy playing it one more time.
So we didn't mention Tiny Towns. Tiny Towns is a great game.
With tiny animals?
With tiny animals. Another one that is on our list that we haven't played yet was My City, a legacy city building game. New York, 1901, which was a simple city building game where you're in New York attempting to build skyscrapers. It was a fun little game. Dice City, you talk about Kingsburg. Something very similar to that was Dice City, which has several little expansions. Dice City, I think, easy to play. Rolling dice and place those dice along your city. You have a colored die that represents each row, and then whatever you roll on that face, you'll put in that corresponding column to get that benefit. And then you can spend money to upgrade those buildings. Dice City is great.
Everdell. Logan needs to play that game again now that he's played it once.
We should just have a podcast about my favorite games.
Just so high maintenance. My goodness. Really enjoyed that game. In fact, Kickstarter latest expansion ended earlier this year. I'm not sure, but it's probably in late pledge, I would imagine. That's a fun one. I know Dave and I have enjoyed Everdell. Dave, have you played all the expansions yet?
I don't think so.
Quite a few expansions. Typically, when you play an expansion, you don't play with all of them. You pick one and play with it. I love how the expansions change the game. It doesn't feel like the same game. It changes it quite a bit. So it makes it the replayability factor of it that much better. Solid game. One that Logan needs to play again.
I still haven't tried it.
Yeah, that's one we should get done a couple times.
We definitely need to play it again because if it's Nathan's any indication of me, I'm going to at least beat him.
Finally, before we close out, we can't not mention Carcassonne.
The original, really. I mean, for us.
All about establishing cities, castles, fortresses within the French countryside. Carcassonne is exactly like you say, Dave. The very first that we played, city building. I don't know if it's the originator of it. Definitely with probably one of the first games that played city building.
Lots of games, old and new.
Next week, we'll dig into 4 games that we didn't talk about today. I guess we did give one spoiler. If you remember that, you'll be ahead of the class for next week.
Until then,
We'll see you forging cities out of nothing. Because we built these cities on rock and roll.